Welcome back to RealFearFiles. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to RealFearFiles. Tonight, we're returning with a chilling collection of true horror accounts rooted deep in the misty heart of the Pacific Northwest. In this episode, we'll journey through 9 disturbing stories of real-life encounters and baffling events that have haunted this wild corner of America for generations. These tales unfold within the vast forests of Washington, along the lonely highways of Oregon, and across the quiet, isolated communities scattered between. Each account has been carefully reconstructed from verified case files, eyewitness interviews, and investigative documents. You'll hear of disappearances that have never been explained, crimes that shattered small towns, mysteries that continue to confound law enforcement, and cold cases that refuse to fade into the past. For privacy and ethical reasons, some names and precise locations have been changed. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to RealFearFiles for nightly doses of true horror that will make you question every sound after dark. Tap the notification bell, because when the night calls, you'll want to be ready. The Cascade Mountains rise along the border of Washington and Oregon like the jagged backbone of a massive sleeping beast. They are breathtaking, majestic, yet dangerous in the quiet way that only untamed wilderness can be. Towering evergreens cloak their slopes, their peaks slice into cold blue skies, and their canyons plunge so deep that sunlight barely brushes the forest floor. For centuries, these mountains have hidden their own secrets. They've claimed hikers, hunters, and wanderers without a trace, swallowing them whole, then holding their stories in silence. Some of those secrets eventually surface again. Others remain buried forever. One such mystery is the disappearance of Nicholas Hartwell, a vanishing that has haunted the Cascades for more than 30 years. It's a story that stands as a reminder of how nature can obscure truth, how vast landscapes can erase answers. It was late September when Nicholas set out on what should have been a simple solo hike into the wilderness. He was 23, a graduate student in environmental science at the University of Washington. By all accounts, Nicholas was careful, almost obsessively so. Friends described him as methodical, the kind of person who double-checked every knot, every weather report, every piece of gear. He worked part-time at an outdoor equipment store in Seattle and spent nearly every weekend exploring nearby trails. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't inexperienced. He was the person everyone trusted to be safe. Nicholas always told someone where he was going, when he'd return, and what route he planned to take. He carried the right equipment, prepared for sudden weather changes, and studied topographical maps long before setting foot on a trail. His thoroughness had become something of a running joke among his friends, though one born of admiration. On the morning of September 27, 1993, Nicholas informed his roommate that he intended to spend the day hiking the Old Cascade Trail, a moderate route near Mount Jefferson. The trail stretched roughly 12 miles round trip, an easy day's trek for an experienced hiker like him. He packed with his usual precision: water bottles, energy bars, a detailed map, a compass, and a headlamp with extra batteries. He wore his well-used hiking boots and his brand-new Gore-Tex jacket, which he'd been eager to test in mountain weather. He left early that morning, hoping to complete the hike and return well before dark. The sky was clear, the air crisp. No rain was forecast. He'd walked this same trail twice before without incident. But this time, Nicholas never came back. When evening fell and Nicholas hadn't returned, his roommate tried calling him repeatedly, but got no answer. By the next morning, concern turned into alarm, and a missing person report was filed. Search efforts began almost immediately. The local sheriff's department organized a full-scale operation, deploying professional rescue teams and dozens of volunteer searchers. Within 2 days, crews were combing every mile of the Old Cascade Trail and the surrounding forested slopes. Then they found something that didn't make sense. Roughly 4 miles up the trail, near a narrow wooden bridge that crossed a fast-moving stream, a search team spotted Nicholas's backpack. It was propped neatly against the trunk of a large pine tree. Intact, undamaged, and positioned with deliberate care. The bag wasn't torn or tossed aside as if dropped in panic. It hadn't been dragged by an animal or battered by weather. It was simply placed there, as if Nicholas had calmly set it down and walked away. Inside, investigators found nearly everything he had packed that morning. His map was folded neatly. His food was untouched. His spare batteries were still sealed. Even his jacket was tucked inside the main compartment, suggesting he hadn't been struggling against cold or rain when he left it behind. No footprints were discovered leading away from the site. No sign of a struggle, no note. Just a perfectly arranged pack sitting beside the trail, waiting, almost expectantly. For days, the search continued. Teams scoured ridges, ravines, and creeks. Helicopters swept overhead. Dogs were brought in, but the scent trail ended abruptly near the same bridge. Speculations spread quickly. Did Nicholas get lost despite his experience? Did he meet someone on the trail? Did he fall or wander off intentionally? None of it fit. His behavior, his planning, his personality, none of it suggested carelessness or self-harm. Weather conditions remained stable through the week. No heavy storms, no sudden drops in temperature. It was as though Nicholas had stepped off the face of the earth, vanishing into thin air. Decades later, the disappearance of Nicholas Hartwell still casts a long shadow over the Cascade wilderness. Search teams have returned over the years, hoping advances in technology might uncover new evidence. But the forest remains silent. Even now, hikers passing through that stretch of trail sometimes report an odd stillness near the bridge, a feeling of being watched or of hearing footsteps behind them when no one else is there. Whether it's imagination, guilt, or something older and unknowable, no one can say. But those who have walked that trail agree on one thing. The Cascades remember what they take. Inside the pack, rescuers found nearly everything Nicholas had taken with him that morning. His water bottles were still full. The energy bars remained unopened. His map and compass were neatly stored in the front pocket, and the headlamp was in working condition, its batteries still strong. Even his car keys were tucked into a side compartment. Only one item was missing: his new Gore-Tex jacket. That single absence struck investigators as deeply strange. Why would someone remove their jacket but leave every other item behind? Why would they set the backpack down so carefully against a tree rather than drop it in haste or abandon it mid-path? Nothing about the discovery suggested panic or accident. It looked deliberate, almost staged. But the backpack wasn't the only detail that disturbed those involved in the search. About 200 yards farther along the trail, in a patch of soft, rain-darkened mud, the search team stumbled across something even harder to explain: footprints. Multiple sets of them. There were at least 3 distinct trails of impressions visible in the earth. One set seemed to match the tread and size of the boots Nicholas was known to have been wearing that day. The other 2 did not. They were noticeably smaller, as if left by a woman or perhaps a child. The state of the soil and the crumbling edges suggested all 3 sets had been made around the same time. The implications were immediate and troubling. This was a remote, seldom-used trail, one that few casual hikers would ever visit. On a weekday morning, it should have been empty. The idea that multiple people were traveling the same isolated path as Nicholas, at roughly the same time, was unsettling. The question investigators couldn't shake was whether these unknown individuals had crossed paths with Nicholas, or whether their appearance there was merely coincidence. Search and rescue teams expanded their operation in every direction. Dogs trained in scent detection were brought in from neighboring counties. They picked up Nicholas's scent roughly 600 yards beyond the spot where his backpack had been found. Then, just as abruptly, the trail ended. The dogs circled, confused, whining, unable to relocate the scent. It was as if the trail had simply dissolved into the forest air. From that point forward, the case only grew stranger. Days stretched into weeks of exhaustive searching, helicopters scanning from above, teams combing ravines, ridges, and creek beds. Despite the intensity of the operation, no further trace of Nicholas was ever recovered. It was as though he had simply vanished from the middle of the wilderness. Investigators interviewed anyone who might have been in the area that day. Regular hikers, locals, and travelers were questioned about unusual activity near Mount Jefferson. Several people remembered seeing a car resembling Nicholas's parked at the trailhead. One witness, a woman who had started her own hike early that morning, recalled seeing a man who looked like Nicholas entering the trail around dawn. Beyond that moment, however, no one reported seeing him again. No one saw him returning. No one saw him with anyone else. No one heard shouting, commotion, or anything that could hint at a struggle. As the weeks passed and leads dried up, the large-scale search effort began to shrink. After a month, the operation was reduced to occasional patrols and local checks. After 3 months, it was effectively suspended. Nicholas Hartwell, once known for his cautiousness and reliability, had disappeared into the Cascades without explanation. His case joined the long list of missing persons files that remain open but dormant, unsolved and untouched. In the years that followed, theories surfaced, as they always do. Some believed Nicholas had slipped while crossing the stream and fallen into the swift current. The rushing water could have carried his body deep into a ravine or underground channel, hidden beyond reach. It was a practical idea, but one that failed to explain the footprints belonging to others, or why his belongings had been left so neatly arranged. It also didn't account for the missing jacket. Another line of speculation suggested that Nicholas may have met someone on the trail, someone who meant him harm. Perhaps he had stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to see. The Pacific Northwest in the early 1990s was known for its remote illegal operations, marijuana grows, and makeshift meth labs tucked away in the backcountry. Maybe Nicholas had accidentally wandered into one of these sites, and the people responsible couldn't risk him leaving. In that theory, the smaller footprints might have belonged to additional accomplices, and the missing jacket could have been taken as a grim token or to conceal evidence. It was a chilling idea, but ultimately just conjecture. No tangible proof ever surfaced to support it. A third possibility circulated among armchair detectives and amateur investigators who became fascinated with Nicholas's disappearance. They proposed that he hadn't been a victim at all, that he had orchestrated his own vanishing. Perhaps he was struggling privately, weighed down by pressures or despair no one close to him ever noticed. Maybe the carefully placed backpack and missing jacket were clues of intention rather than confusion. According to this theory, Nicholas might have wanted to disappear, to shed his old identity and start fresh somewhere far away. Yet those who knew him best found that theory impossible to accept. Nicholas loved the wilderness, but he loved his life too. He had plans, friends, and a future he seemed eager to reach. Nothing about his behavior in the days before the trip hinted at despair or the desire to escape. And so, 3 decades later, the mystery endures. No body was ever recovered. No credible sightings were ever confirmed. The old Cascade Trail remains a place of quiet beauty and quiet dread, its silence heavy with unanswered questions. The only certainty is that on a clear September morning, a careful young man entered those mountains and was never seen again. The careful way the backpack had been arranged, along with the missing jacket, led some to wonder if the entire scene had been staged, an intentional effort to make the disappearance appear darker and more mysterious than it truly was. But this theory, like the others, had cracks of its own. Nicholas's life was steady and full. He was close to his family, thriving in his graduate program, and seemed to have a clear sense of purpose. There were no signs of depression, no notes, no statements about wanting to start over or vanish. If he had intended to disappear, why would he leave his car parked openly at the trailhead, inviting immediate suspicion? Through the years, the case has been revisited repeatedly by detectives, journalists, and countless amateur sleuths drawn to its enduring mystery. Each time, technology has evolved a little further, offering new tools and hopes. Forensic specialists have reanalyzed old evidence using DNA techniques that didn't exist in the early 1990s, Investigators have compared the unidentified footprints against national databases and criminal records, searching for even a partial match. Yet despite all these efforts, the puzzle has refused to yield an answer. Nothing uncovered has definitively explained what befell Nicholas Hartwell on that cool September morning in 1993. The repercussions of his disappearance rippled far beyond the investigation itself. The loss changed families, communities, and the way locals viewed the wilderness around them. His mother gave interviews for years, appearing on regional news and in documentary specials, hoping that some long-buried detail might surface. His father passed away in 2007, still without the faintest idea of what became of his son. Nicholas's younger sister channeled her grief into service. She joined volunteer search and rescue organizations and dedicated her life to helping others avoid the same fate that had stolen her brother. Over time, the case became part of Pacific Northwest folklore, a ghost story retold by hikers and rangers, a cautionary legend whispered around campfires. The message was always the same, that the wilderness, however breathtaking, could turn merciless without warning. The disappearance left a psychological mark on those who loved the outdoors. After the news spread, many hikers admitted they felt uneasy venturing out alone. Some stopped visiting the old Cascade Trail altogether, saying the place felt haunted. Others began changing their habits, choosing more populated trails, carrying 2 or 3 forms of communication, and telling multiple people where they were headed before setting out. The mountains themselves seemed to take on a different presence after Nicholas vanished. Once seen as a place of peace and rejuvenation, they now felt ominous, watchful, almost predatory. Locals began to speak of them with a reverence tinged with fear, convinced that the Cascades kept their own secrets and guarded them fiercely. What makes Nicholas Hartwell's disappearance so chilling isn't just the lack of closure. It's the unanswered questions that keep multiplying. The footprints found in the mud have never been adequately explained. Who were those other people on the trail that morning? Why has no one ever stepped forward, not even anonymously? Were they witnesses, victims, or something else entirely? The official reports never provided clarity. The mystery exists in the silence between facts, the quiet space where speculation grows. To this day, hikers continue to explore the Cascade Mountains by the thousands. They walk the same trails Nicholas once did, confident they'll return safely to their cars, their families, their daily lives. And almost all of them do. But every year, a handful don't. For those few, Nicholas among them, the mountains have other intentions. They take what they choose and never return it, keeping their silence as steadfastly as the stone ridges and evergreen shadows that define them. The enigma of Nicholas Hartwell endures as a reminder that even in an age of satellites, cell service, and GPS tracking, nature remains vast, indifferent, and capable of swallowing human beings whole. Technology cannot always save us from the wild, nor can planning or experience guarantee safety. The natural world moves according to its own laws, ancient, unbending, and unconcerned with human logic. Somewhere in those mountains, Nicholas is still out there, perhaps resting in an unreachable ravine, or more disturbingly, carried away by forces no one has yet understood. His story reshaped the way people think about solitude and safety in the Pacific Northwest. Families who once encouraged adventure began double-checking every detail of a trip: the routes, the weather, the communication plans. His disappearance became both a warning and a symbol of how fragile our presence is when measured against the immensity of the wild. No credible sightings have ever surfaced. No bones or clothing fragments have ever been recovered. The file on Nicholas Hartwell remains open in the sheriff's archives, though years have passed without new leads. His mother, now in her 90s, still lives quietly in the Seattle area, clinging to hope that one day someone might speak up or stumble upon a clue that will finally tell her what happened. His sister continues to volunteer in search operations across the state, guiding others through the same terrain that once took her brother, helping families find closure even as she remains without her own. And the old Cascade Trail still winds through the dense mountain wilderness, serene, beautiful and treacherous. Its switchbacks cut through the trees as they always have, indifferent to the fear or fascination they inspire. The forest watches, listens, and keeps its counsel. Whatever secrets it holds, it has chosen not to share them. Portland, Oregon, has always balanced brightness and shadow, a city where art, coffee, and rain mingle with whispers of darker things beneath the surface. It sits at the meeting point of the Columbia and Willamette rivers, a landscape framed by forests and mountains that seem to brood just beyond the skyline. Behind the charm of its bookstores, coffee houses, and riverside walks lies a network of abandoned buildings, forgotten docks, and corners where the city's pulse slows into something more secretive. It was here, amid that strange balance of culture and quiet menace, that another disappearance took place, one that would echo the same kind of mystery that surrounded Nicholas Hartwell. In the autumn of 2008, Ellie Morrison vanished without explanation. She was 21, a junior at Portland State University, majoring in business administration with a concentration in entrepreneurship and management. Ellie lived in a modest apartment in the Pearl District with 2 roommates who would later describe her as outgoing, adventurous, and endlessly curious about the world. She was the kind of person who made friends in minutes, who filled rooms with laughter and restless energy. Her parents, living in Salem about an hour south, spoke proudly of her. Her father, a retired accountant, and her mother, a nurse, had raised their daughter to be responsible and grounded even as she chased excitement and independence. For them, life was ordinary, quiet, structured, predictable, until the night their daughter disappeared. On the evening of October 3rd, 2008, Ellie went out with a few close friends from her university. They began the night at a downtown bar just after sunset. There were 4 of them in total. According to those present, Ellie had only 2 drinks over several hours. Nothing excessive, nothing that would cause concern. She was animated and joyful, celebrating the end of midterms and the approach of the fall break. The group chatted about classes, upcoming plans, and weekend trips. Everything about the evening felt unremarkable, the kind of night they had shared countless times before. Around midnight, the friends decided to leave the bar and walk to a nearby restaurant for something to eat. They joked about the cold air, wrapped scarves tighter, and stepped out onto the dimly lit streets of downtown Portland. The city's glow reflected off puddles left from earlier rain, and the hum of distant traffic filled the silence between bursts of laughter. It should have been an ordinary walk. But for Ellie Morrison, that walk marked the last time anyone would ever see her. They left the bar together, all 4 of them, laughing as they stepped into the cool Portland night. Surveillance footage from outside the bar later confirmed it. The group exiting side by side, their figures illuminated briefly in the glow of the streetlights before turning down the block toward their next stop. The restaurant was only a couple of streets away, barely a 10-minute walk under normal circumstances. But somewhere between that bar and the glow of the diner sign waiting ahead, something broke the pattern. Ellie Morrison slipped away. Her friends continued on, unaware that their group had quietly diminished by 1. When they reached the restaurant, they slid into a booth and ordered food, still talking and laughing, assuming Ellie would appear any minute. 15 minutes passed, then 20. One of them finally pulled out a phone and sent her a text. "Where did you go?" No reply. They tried calling next, straight to voicemail. The laughter faded as unease crept in. They retraced their route back toward the bar, scanning alleys, doorways, and sidewalks, but Ellie was gone. By 2 in the morning, their worry turned to panic. They called the police. At first, the investigation moved sluggishly. The officers on duty treated the report as another case of a young woman out too late, maybe choosing to stay somewhere unexpected. The initial assumption, a voluntary disappearance, proved devastatingly wrong, because by the time investigators began taking the case seriously the following afternoon, whatever had happened to Ellie had already slipped far beyond the reach of the first responders. When she didn't return home or contact anyone the next day, the case was reclassified as an official missing person investigation. Detectives began combing through hours of surveillance footage from downtown, studying every camera angle they could find along her likely route. It didn't take long before they saw something that rewrote everything her friends thought they knew. At roughly 12:15 a.m., about 15 minutes after leaving the bar, Ellie appeared on a camera mounted above a corner store. She was walking down a dim side street and not toward the restaurant. She was heading in the opposite direction, moving with purpose, not wandering. And she wasn't alone. The footage captured her beside a tall figure, a man, though the camera's angle revealed little more than a blurred outline and the curve of a baseball cap shadowing his face. Ellie seemed to be speaking to him, gesturing lightly as if they were familiar. Then, just as they reached the intersection, the camera's coverage ended. That was the last confirmed sighting of Ellie Morrison. Further review of nearby cameras deepened the mystery. Another video, taken from outside the bar, showed Ellie leaving the building about 5 minutes after her friends, not with them, but beside the same unidentified man. He had his hand on her shoulder, steering her slightly as they walked. Her posture leaned toward him, not entirely comfortable, not quite resistant, the ambiguous body language that could have meant trust, intoxication, or both. None of her friends recalled seeing this man inside the bar or meeting him that night. To them, he simply hadn't existed. Detectives released stills of the man to the public, appealing for anyone who might recognize him. Dozens of calls poured in, names, theories, false leads. Each one disintegrated under scrutiny. No match in state or federal databases, no credible witness who could confirm his identity. The man was like a ghost, captured by chance on tape, then gone. Weeks passed. The city kept raining. Posters with Ellie's photo multiplied on poles and storefronts until they began to fade and curl. With every day that passed, the possibility of a benign explanation grew smaller. Detectives turned to her phone records, hoping for something concrete. What they found instead was strange. A string of messages exchanged with a contact saved only as R. The texts began 3 days before she vanished. They were brief, careful, and vague. You coming tonight? Maybe. Who else? Some people from work. You'd like them. The final message came on the night she disappeared. At 11:02 p.m., R texted, "Where are you right now?" Ellie's reply 15 minutes later read, "Downtown with friends. Maybe after." Then came R's last message, "Corner of Southwest Alder and Park. 10 minutes. That was it. Investigators traced the number to a prepaid burner phone, activated only 3 weeks earlier, used exclusively to contact Ellie, and deactivated within hours of her disappearance. Whoever R was, they had gone to deliberate lengths to remain invisible. The pattern suggested planning. Someone who had built trust, kept contact limited, and orchestrated a meeting for that specific night. But how had this connection begun? Had they met online? Through a class, a mutual friend, a brief encounter that escalated? No one could say. There was no trace of R in her social media, email, or call logs beyond those few cryptic exchanges. Detectives focused on the meeting spot, Southwest Alder and Park, a quiet corner of downtown Portland lined with parking garages and offices that emptied after dark. Search teams combed every inch of it, reviewing security feeds from surrounding buildings. One parking garage camera finally captured something unsettling. At 1:47 a.m., a silver sedan pulled into the garage. Behind the wheel was the same man from the earlier footage. Tall, dark clothes, baseball cap. He was alone. No sign of Ellie inside the car from the available angle. The vehicle remained parked for 7 minutes. Then it backed out and disappeared down the street. Investigators scoured DMV records for any match to the car's make and model, but there were thousands of similar sedans in Oregon alone. No license plate could be made out from the grainy video. It was another wall of uncertainty, a solid lead dissolving into nothing. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Ellie's parents appeared on local newscasts, pleading for help, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They offered a reward for any information leading to her return. They hired a private investigator who retraced every step the police had already taken. Every clue led nowhere. No witnesses came forward. No body was found. A year later, Ellie's name had become one more entry on the long list of missing women in the Pacific Northwest. A face printed on flyers, fading in the weather, gradually replaced by newer faces and newer tragedies. Then, in 2010, another young woman vanished under eerily similar circumstances. Her name was Sarah, 22 years old, a university student. She had gone out with friends to a downtown bar and never made it home. Security footage showed her walking away late at night with a man who matched the same physical description: tall, dark clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. The resemblance between the two cases was unmistakable. Investigators reopened the Morrison file, comparing timelines, reviewing footage, analyzing both women's communications. Could this be the same man? A serial predator operating quietly, striking years apart? No one could prove it, but the symmetry was undeniable. Two young women, both bright and ambitious, both last seen in Portland's downtown core, both vanishing into the same rain-slicked streets under the same kind of night. And just like before, the trail stopped short. No body, no answers. Only that same haunting image, a figure in a baseball cap, half obscured by shadow, leading someone away into the dark, and the endless question of what waited beyond the edge of the cameras. Before detectives could make real progress on the Morrison case, tragedy struck again, this time with an ending that left no room for hope. 6 months after Sarah Wainwright was last seen leaving a downtown bar, her body was discovered deep in the Tillamook State Forest, roughly 60 miles outside Portland. The forest was dense and damp, the kind of place where sound seemed to dissolve into the moss. A pair of hunters stumbled across what at first looked like discarded clothing, only to realize the awful truth moments later. The remains were confirmed as Sarah's within days. She had been dead for months. The coroner determined the cause of death to be a massive blow to the skull, blunt force trauma inflicted by an object heavy enough to crush bone but not leave a clean fracture. It was a deliberate killing. Forensics gathered what trace evidence they could from the decomposed scene: fibers, soil, hair fragments, partial DNA. One sample, a minuscule skin cell found beneath Sarah's fingernail, finally provided the break the investigation had been starving for. The match led to Michael Davies, a 34-year-old delivery driver from Gresham. Davies worked for a regional logistics company, the kind that serviced dozens of routes around Oregon and Washington. His job gave him constant access to vehicles, vans, sedans, box trucks, all registered under the company's name and rotated frequently enough to make tracking them nearly impossible. Police arrested him quietly outside a distribution center one morning. He didn't resist, didn't ask why. He just stared at the officers as if he'd been expecting them for some time. Davies was charged with Sarah's murder after DNA confirmation came through. The case against him was straightforward, almost surgical: physical evidence, timeline, opportunity. But when investigators pressed him about Ellie Morrison, whose disappearance had followed such an eerily similar pattern 2 years earlier, his demeanor changed. He said he'd never heard her name before, never met her, never been in contact with her. Without any physical link between him and Ellie, no DNA, no vehicle trace, no witness placing them together, prosecutors couldn't build a viable case. They had to let that part of the mystery remain untouched. In 2012, Michael Davies was convicted of Sarah's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought relief to one family and renewed torment to another. For the Morrisons, the courtroom victory meant nothing. Their daughter's chair at the table was still empty. Her room in Salem remained as she'd left it, neat, hopeful, waiting. Over the years, investigators have quietly speculated that Ellie may have been Davies's first victim. Perhaps she was the one who taught him how to disappear someone cleanly, how to erase a body, a trail, a name. Others believe the opposite, that she was taken by someone else entirely, another predator working the same hunting grounds, using the same methods of control and disappearance. What makes Ellie's case so chilling is not only that she vanished, but the precision implied by every clue left behind. The messages from the burner phone, the timed meeting, it all suggested planning, not impulse. This wasn't a random assault on a stranger. It was someone who had studied her, earned her trust, then manipulated her into isolation. Someone who knew how to make her walk willingly into the dark. Her parents still live in the same house in Salem, gray-shingled and quiet. Their porch light left burning every night. They still receive the occasional tip. A caller who's certain they saw her face somewhere. A letter claiming to hold secret knowledge. An email from an amateur sleuth, convinced they've cracked the mystery. Each lead ends the same way. Disappointment, silence, the echo of something that refuses to be found. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the cedar canopy of Oregon's forests, the truth still waits. Bone beneath soil, fabric beneath roots, patient, nameless, undiscovered. The truth about what happened on that October night in 2008 is likely known only to two people. The woman who vanished and the one who made her vanish. One is gone forever. The other may be behind bars or may still walk freely beneath the same clouds and rain that first hid his crime. Seattle, on a November night, is a city caught between two worlds. Down by the waterfront, the streets shimmer under the reflection of fairy lights. Music spills out of half-open doors, and the tang of salt air mixes with coffee and diesel. But climb the hills, up toward Capitol Hill or the University District, where the fog thickens in alleyways and the streetlights blink through the mist, and the city feels like it belongs to something else entirely. It is there, in those darker neighborhoods, that whispers collect. Old crimes, forgotten names, and the narrow distance between a scream and the next lit window. No one remembered Adam Holbrook as anything remarkable. He was born in 1986 in Bremerton, Washington. A quiet boy from a shipyard town, polite, unassuming, the kind of face that drifts through memory without ever settling. In high school, he blended in so well that even teachers later struggled to recall details about him. He wasn't cruel, wasn't charming, simply there. As an adult, he lived a drifting life. Part-time janitor at a YMCA, stockroom helper at a Belltown bar, night driver for a seafood company. He was steady but invisible, known more for showing up than for saying much. There was nothing in his record, nothing in his personality, to suggest the darkness that would later bear his name. The first case that would eventually connect to Adam began like countless others in the Pacific Northwest. A single missing woman. A freshman at the University of Washington failed to show up for class. Then another disappearance, months later. A cafe worker who closed up late and never came home. Then a house sitter in Renton who left her groceries on the table, a crossword half-finished beside them. Each report was tragic but unexceptional. Seattle always had its share of vanishings. But one detective, Jessica Wu, a junior member of the newly formed King County Lost Persons Task Force, noticed something unsettling. The missing women all shared certain patterns. They disappeared on Tuesday or Friday nights, their phones went dark within minutes of leaving work, and each had last been seen within a 5-block radius of a place where Adam Holbrook had been employed that same season. Jessica, who had joined the force after her cousin went missing years earlier near North Bend, recognized the weight of coincidence. She brought her suspicions to her partner, veteran detective Mark Iskander, who was skeptical at first. Adam was a quiet, middle-aged worker with no priors and no discernible motive. But Jessica persisted. They pulled employment logs, payroll sheets, and timestamps. There it was. Adam's signature on a cleaning checklist just 15 minutes before the last sighting of a student named Holly Turner, whose umbrella was later discovered crushed in an alley after midnight. The deeper they dug, the more the pattern emerged. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store showed Adam buying duct tape and bottled water the same night two sisters vanished from a bus stop. Another camera caught his battered green Chevy idling near the ferry terminal on the evening Aaron Chandler was last seen alive. Still, there was no physical evidence linking him directly to the crimes. No bodies, no DNA, no confession. The detectives could do nothing but wait and watch. Adam's movements were meticulous, almost artistic in their restraint. He chose victims who lived alone, who worked late shifts, who could vanish quietly. He interacted with them just enough to be remembered but not enough to raise alarm. He always had an alibi, a time card stamped, a co-worker's casual confirmation. And when the city's rains washed over another missing poster, he was already working somewhere else. By winter's end, 5 people had disappeared along his path. Rumors began to crawl through the city. People whispered about a man who blended into every crowd, who smiled politely and left no trace. Then nature itself intervened. A violent February storm tore through Seattle, uprooting trees and flooding parks. When the winds calmed, a couple walking their dog in Carkeek Park noticed a half-exposed shape in the mud beneath a fallen oak. What they found there ended the waiting. It was Holly Turner, the missing college student. She was still wearing the silver earrings she'd received for her birthday 2 weeks before she vanished. The autopsy ruled death by suffocation, deliberate, controlled, efficient. Almost nothing remained that could identify her killer. Almost nothing, except a single curled dog hair embedded in the weave of her sweater. Jessica remembered reading that Adam sometimes looked after his sister's poodle mix. That detail, faint as it was, became the thread she needed. She obtained a warrant for his Queen Anne apartment, a small, obsessively tidy one-bedroom overlooking the Sound. The search turned up almost nothing. Spotless counters, neatly folded clothes, the kind of sterile order that feels rehearsed. But beneath a bathroom pipe, wedged behind rust and dust, an officer found a small blue gym bag. Inside were a pair of mud-streaked boots, a set of unfamiliar keys, and a stack of old thank you cards from past employers. On one of those cards, pressed into the paper like a ghost, was a brownish thumbprint. Forensics matched it weeks later to a print found on the handle of a discarded umbrella in Ballard, the same alley where another woman had vanished months earlier. Adam was arrested soon after. In interrogation, he was calm, almost detached. He claimed ignorance. He said he didn't remember Holly, didn't know any of the missing people. He wanted, he said, only to be left alone. The city, however, couldn't look away. Newspapers dubbed him the disappearer. His face, ordinary, colorless, forgettable, stared from every television and headline. Talk shows dissected his psyche. Families of the missing filled nightly broadcasts with tears and unanswered questions. When the trial began, the courtroom felt like a cathedral of collective dread. The prosecution's case was built from fragments, circumstantial evidence, overlapping timelines, fingerprints, the dog hair, and the chilling pattern that spanned years. There was no confession, no direct witness, no video of the crimes. But there was the silence of too many graves still unmarked. Adam sat expressionless throughout, his eyes often fixed on the floor. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his tone was flat. Not cruel, not defensive, simply distant, as if he'd already left the room. His defense attorneys argued the evidence was too thin, too coincidental. They reminded the jury that no one had ever seen him commit a crime. But for the public, the verdict was already decided. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury reached a deadlock. He wasn't convicted of murder, only of lesser charges: tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, interfering with an active investigation. The sentence was 5 years, with eligibility for parole after 3. When the gavel fell, the city's reign seemed to hold its breath. Adam Holbrook returned to obscurity behind prison walls, his true guilt or innocence still a matter of debate. And for the families of the missing, justice felt like another ghost, visible for a moment in the fog, then gone again into the endless Pacific rain. Before investigators could gain any real footing on the Morrison disappearance, another tragedy unfolded, one that ended any illusion of hope. 6 months after Sarah Wainwright was last spotted leaving a Portland bar, her body surfaced in the depths of Tillamook State Forest, about 60 miles from the city. The woods there are ancient and heavy with silence, the kind where every sound seems swallowed by moss. Two hunters came upon what looked like scraps of old fabric tangled in roots. Moments later, they realized what they were seeing. Within a few days, dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Sarah. She had been gone for months. The autopsy concluded she had died from a single devastating strike to the skull, blunt force trauma from something solid and deliberate. It wasn't rage, it was intent. Forensic teams combed the site for anything left behind by time or rain. They recovered fibers, fragments of hair, traces of soil, and one faint biological clue: a sliver of skin found beneath Sarah's fingernails. That small trace cracked open the entire investigation. It pointed to Michael Davies, 34, a delivery driver living in Gresham. Davies worked for a mid-sized logistics company with an extensive reach through Oregon and Washington. His duties gave him constant access to a fleet of rotating vehicles: vans, sedans, trucks. None officially his, all easily replaced and hard to trace. Police moved quietly. One gray morning, they intercepted him outside a distribution center. He didn't run or resist. He didn't even speak. He simply watched the officers approach as though he had been waiting for them for a long time. DNA analysis confirmed the connection, and Davies was charged with Sarah's murder. The evidence was clinical, almost textbook: a genetic match, a timeline that aligned, opportunity tied neatly with motive. But when detectives shifted their questions toward Ellie Morrison, who had vanished under eerily similar circumstances 2 years earlier, something in his composure changed. He claimed not to know her name, not to have met her, not to have ever crossed paths. And without DNA, witnesses, or even a single verifiable link between him and Ellie, prosecutors had no leverage. The Morrison case had to remain officially separate, unsolved, uncharged, unfinished. By 2012, the trial against Michael Davies concluded. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. For Sarah's family, the conviction brought a small measure of closure. For Ellie's, it only reopened the wound. Their daughter's room in Salem still stood untouched, bed neatly made, walls pinned with photos and notes, waiting for someone who would never return. In quiet circles, detectives have long whispered their suspicions that Ellie might have been Davies' first victim, the one whose disappearance taught him precision, how to erase footprints, dispose of a body, and move unseen through the cracks of routine. Others hold the opposite theory, that Ellie's case belongs to another unseen predator entirely, one who happened to operate in the same shadowed corners and use the same patient tricks. What makes Ellie's story so haunting isn't just that she disappeared, but the design behind her vanishing. Every detail, the anonymous messages, the prepaid phone, the carefully timed meeting, spoke of forethought. This wasn't chance. It was choreography. Someone had studied her habits, won her trust, then used it to isolate her. Someone who knew exactly how to make her step willingly into the dark. Her parents remain in their old Salem home, gray-shingled and soft with age. Each night they still keep the porch light on. They continue to receive messages: a stranger claiming a sighting in another state, an email with a blurry photograph, a letter hinting at secret knowledge. Every lead collapses the same way: a burst of hope, followed by silence. Somewhere out there, maybe still in the Pacific Northwest, under the canopy of cedar and rain, the truth waits. Bone beneath soil, fabric caught in roots, unfound, unspoken. Whatever happened that October night in 2008 is likely known only to two people: the girl who vanished and the one who took her. One lies forever silent. The other may be locked away, or may still walk free beneath the same clouds that once concealed his crime. Seattle, come November, is a city divided against itself. Down by the waterfront, light bounces off the water like scattered gold. Ferries drift across Elliott Bay, and music hums through half-open doors. The air tastes of salt and diesel, of promise and loneliness in equal measure. But travel uphill, into Capitol Hill, the University District, or the fog-bound stretches south of Beacon Hill, and the city changes face. There, beneath flickering streetlights and rain-slick alleys, it feels haunted by its own silence. It's in those darker neighborhoods where secrets collect. The unsolved, the unspoken, the distance between a cry for help and the next lit window. Adam Holbrook never stood out, at least not in life. Born in 1986 in Bremerton, a quiet town near the Sound, he was the kind of person most people forget after meeting. Soft-spoken, polite, his face nondescript, his voice barely above a murmur. Teachers described him as pleasant but unremarkable. Friends remembered little beyond his stillness. Adulthood didn't change much. He worked where jobs were easy to get and easier to lose. Janitor at a YMCA, barback at a Belltown lounge, part-time truck driver for a seafood supplier. He wasn't ambitious or social, but he showed up on time. His file at every job was the same, dependable, quiet, forgettable. And yet, out of that blankness, something monstrous began to grow. The first case connected to him started like many Pacific Northwest mysteries. A woman missing without a trace. A University of Washington freshman didn't return to her dorm after work. Then another. A cafe employee closing late in Ballard. Then a third. A house sitter in Renton, gone overnight. Groceries still sweating on the counter beside an unfinished crossword. Each case alone was tragic, but together they built a quiet pattern. Seattle had always known disappearances, but something about these was different. Detective Jessica Wu, a junior investigator on the new King County Lost Persons Task Force, saw what others missed. The missing all vanished on Tuesdays or Fridays. Each phone shut off minutes after leaving work, and every one of them was last seen within a short walk of a business where Adam Holbrook had been employed that season. Jessica's instincts ran deep. Her own cousin had vanished years before on a roadside near North Bend. She took the findings to her partner, Detective Mark Iskander, a seasoned cop from Tacoma, pragmatic and wary of coincidences. But Jessica pressed. They started pulling employment logs, verifying shifts, cross-checking locations. Then, there it was, Adam's signature, scrawled on a YMCA cleaning log just 15 minutes before the last known sighting of Holly Turner, the missing college student. Her umbrella had later been discovered collapsed and broken in a narrow alley. The deeper the detectives went, the clearer the pattern became. Security footage surfaced. Adam buying duct tape and bottled water the same night two sisters disappeared from a Rainier Avenue bus stop. Another video caught his dented green Chevy pickup idling near the ferry docks the night Aaron Chandler was last seen. It wasn't enough. No bodies, no witnesses, no definitive proof. All Jessica and Mark could do was watch, wait, and document every coincidence stacking like kindling. Adam's method was clinical. He chose victims who blended into routine. Solitary workers, night commuters, people easy to forget. He interacted just enough to be recognized later, but never enough to raise suspicion. His alibis were neat, his timesheets in order. When the city's rain washed away another face from a poster board, he was already onto his next job. By year's end, 5 disappearances followed his orbit. Seattle began to whisper about a man who could pass beside you on the street and leave nothing behind. Then nature intervened. In February, a brutal storm ripped through the city, whined uprooted trees and tore down lines. When calm finally returned, a couple hiking through Carkeek Park saw something pale, half buried in the mud beneath a fallen oak. What they uncovered ended months of questions. It was Holly Turner. She was still wearing the silver earrings her mother had given her for her birthday just 2 weeks before she went missing. The medical examiner ruled suffocation as the cause. Precise, methodical, emotionless. Almost no evidence remained. Almost none. except for one curled dog hair tangled in her sweater. Jessica remembered reading that Adam sometimes helped his sister look after her poodle mix. It was a fragile lead, but enough. She secured a search warrant for his Queen Anne apartment, a modest one-bedroom overlooking the Sound. The place was immaculate, too immaculate, the kind of order that suggests performance. The kitchen spotless, the bed tightly made, the bathroom scrubbed raw. But under a pipe beneath the sink, an officer found a blue gym bag wedged behind the plumbing. Inside, a pair of mud-caked boots, a ring of unfamiliar keys, and a stack of thank you notes from old employers. One of those cards bore a faint brown fingerprint pressed into the paper like a bruise. Weeks later, forensic testing confirmed the print matched one recovered from a broken umbrella handle found in Ballard, the same alley where another woman had vanished months earlier. That was enough. Adam Holbrook was arrested. During questioning, he stayed calm, detached. He said he didn't remember Holly, didn't know any of the names read aloud to him. He told detectives he just wanted to be left in peace. Seattle didn't believe him. News outlets christened him the disappearer. His unremarkable face appeared everywhere. Newspapers, television, social media. Talk shows dissected his past. Psychologists debated his motives. And families of the missing filled every broadcast with their grief. The courtroom during his trial felt heavy, as if the entire city's sorrow had gathered there. The prosecution's case was a lattice of circumstantial evidence. Fingerprints, timelines, the dog hair, the eerie consistency of his movements. No confession, no direct witness, just a chorus of coincidences too sharp to ignore. Adam barely reacted through it all. He sat still, eyes low, expression unreadable. When asked to speak, his voice was hollow, distant, neither angry nor remorseful, simply absent. His defense argued the obvious. No bodies tied to him but one, no definitive proof, only speculation stitched together by fear. But public opinion had already sealed his fate. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury failed to agree. The verdict? No conviction for murder, only guilty on lesser counts: obstruction, tampering, and interference with an active case. His sentence, 5 years, with the chance for parole after 3. When the final gavel struck, the rain outside the courthouse seemed to pause, as though even the weather was waiting to exhale. Behind prison walls, Adam Holbrook faded again into anonymity, a man either wrongly accused or monstrously clever. For the families of the missing, justice remained a rumor. Something glimpsed briefly through fog, then swallowed once more by the endless gray rain of the Pacific Northwest. Before detectives could make any real headway into the Morrison disappearance, another case broke open, and this time there would be no miracle ending. 6 months after Sarah Wainwright vanished outside a downtown Portland bar, her remains were found deep within the Tillamook State Forest, a wilderness so thick and damp that sound seemed to vanish into the moss. 2 hunters stumbled across what they thought were shreds of clothing caught beneath a root system. Then they saw the shape beneath. Within days, dental records confirmed the worst. Sarah had been dead for months. The medical examiner determined she'd been killed by a single blow to the head, blunt force trauma from something heavy and precise. It wasn't random violence, it was planned. Crime scene teams spent days combing through the forest floor, collecting what evidence the weather had not yet erased: fibers, hair, particles of soil, and one crucial fragment, a single skin cell lodged beneath her fingernail. It was enough to change everything. That microscopic clue led investigators to Michael Davies, age 34, a delivery driver based in Gresham. He worked for a regional shipping company that operated across Oregon and Washington, with a revolving door of vehicles, box trucks, vans, sedans, all registered under company ownership. That constant turnover made tracking any single car nearly impossible. Detectives moved in quietly. One cold morning, they found Davies in the loading bay of a distribution center. He didn't argue or ask why. He just looked at them, expression flat, as if the moment had been waiting for him. DNA testing sealed the connection, and prosecutors charged him with Sarah's murder. The evidence came together neatly: genetic confirmation, a clear timeline, access, and opportunity. But when detectives shifted the conversation to Ellie Morrison, the young woman who disappeared 2 years earlier under nearly identical circumstances, Davies changed. His quietness hardened. He said he'd never heard of her, never met her, never had reason to. Without physical evidence or a traceable link between them, no fibers, no phone records, no shared locations, prosecutors couldn't touch the Morrison case. It had to stay open, suspended in the same silence that had surrounded it from the start. By 2012, Michael Davies was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Sarah's family found a thin piece in the verdict. Ellie's parents, however, were left with the same void. Their daughter's bedroom in Salem remained untouched. The photos still on the wall, the bed made tight, waiting for someone who would never come home. In the years that followed, quiet speculation endured. Some investigators believed Ellie was Davies's first victim, the one who taught him how to vanish someone without trace, how to leave nothing behind but mystery. Others were certain the opposite was true, that Ellie had fallen prey to someone else entirely, another predator operating in the same shadows using similar tactics. What keeps her story alive isn't just that she disappeared, it's how deliberate it all seemed. The cryptic messages from R, the disposable phone, the planned meeting, none of it felt impulsive. Someone had watched her, studied her, built trust over time, then guided her right to the edge. Someone who knew how to make her step willingly into the dark. Her parents still live in their weathered Salem home, the porch light glowing each night like a promise. They still answer the occasional letter or email. Someone claiming to have seen her face, a stranger insisting they know where she went. Each lead ends the same: hope, followed by quiet. And perhaps somewhere, beneath layers of cedar and fog, the truth waits. Bone under soil, fabric beneath roots. Patient, wordless, undiscovered. Whatever happened that October night in 2008 belongs to only two people: the woman who vanished and the one who took her. One is long gone. The other may be serving life, or still walking freely through the same rain that once hid his crime. Seattle in November is a city of divided selves. By the waterfront, the ferries gleam like ghosts, and reflections dance on the water. Music drifts through doorways, mingling with salt and diesel and espresso steam. But climb the hills toward Capitol Hill or the University District, where fog curls around the lamps and the streets echo only with rain, and the city feels haunted by its own silence. It's in those upper neighborhoods where the old whispers gather, stories of missing faces, unclosed cases, and the thin distance between a scream and the next lit window. No one had ever called Adam Holbrook remarkable. Born in 1986 in Bremerton, he grew up in a shipyard town of quiet streets and muted lives. Teachers remembered him as polite, barely talkative, the kind of student who never caused trouble and left no impression. Friends, if he had them, could recall little beyond his stillness. As an adult, he drifted between jobs: janitor at a YMCA, night stalker at a Belltown bar, part-time driver for a seafood distributor, reliable, silent, unmemorable. There was nothing in his life to hint at the darkness that would one day bear his name. The first missing persons report that would later tie to him began the way so many do in the Pacific Northwest, with one young woman vanishing after work. A University of Washington freshman didn't make it back to her dorm. Then, months later, a cafe worker failed to come home after closing. Then another, a house sitter in Renton, groceries half unpacked on the counter beside a half-finished crossword. Each case alone was heartbreak. Together they formed a pattern. Detective Jessica Wu, one of the youngest members of the new King County Missing Persons Task Force, noticed that pattern first. The missing women all disappeared on Tuesday or Friday nights. Each phone went dark within minutes of their last shift ending, and every one of them was last seen within blocks of a workplace connected to one man, Adam Holbrook. Wu's instincts were honed by personal loss. Her cousin had gone missing years earlier near North Bend. She brought her findings to her partner, Detective Mark Iskander, a veteran who distrusted patterns that looked too neat. But Wu persisted. They began cross-referencing employee rosters, timestamps, and security logs. One entry caught their attention: Adam's signature on a cleaning sheet at the YMCA just 15 minutes before the last sighting of Holly Turner, a 19-year-old student. Her umbrella had been found crushed in an alley days later. As the detectives dug deeper, the links grew stronger. Surveillance footage showed Adam buying duct tape and bottled water the same night two sisters vanished from a bus stop. Another camera captured his dented green Chevy parked near the ferry terminal on the evening Aaron Chandler was last seen alive. But there was still nothing concrete, no physical proof, no witnesses. The detectives could only watch. Adam's movements were methodical. He targeted those who lived alone, who worked late, who could vanish without setting off alarms. He kept interactions minimal but memorable, ensuring he was always recognized, just not remembered clearly enough. His records were flawless, time cards stamped, co-workers confirming shifts. When another poster peeled in the rain, he was already somewhere else, clocked in at another job. By winter's end, 5 disappearances traced the outline of his path. Rumors thickened about a man who blended into the city's crowds, whose presence was like fog, visible, then gone. Then the storm came. A February gale slammed into Seattle, toppling trees and flooding trails. When the sky finally cleared, a couple walking their dog through Carkeek Park saw something pale, half buried beneath an uprooted oak. It was Holly Turner. She was still wearing her silver earrings, a birthday gift from her mother just 2 weeks before she vanished. The autopsy ruled the cause of death as suffocation, deliberate, measured. Almost no forensic evidence survived. Almost. A single strand of dog hair was embedded in her sweater's weave. Jessica remembered reading that Adam occasionally watched his sister's poodle mix. It was enough for a warrant. His Queen Anne apartment was spare and spotless. The air smelled faintly of bleach, nothing out of place, except for a small blue gym bag hidden behind a bathroom pipe. Inside, mud-caked boots, a bundle of unmarked keys, and a stack of thank you cards from former employers. One of those cards held a faint brown thumbprint pressed into the paper's surface. Weeks later, lab results matched that print to one found on the handle of a broken umbrella discovered in Ballard, the same alley where another woman had disappeared. That was all the detectives needed. They arrested Adam Holbrook at dawn. He didn't resist, didn't protest. During questioning, his answers were clipped and hollow. He said he didn't remember Holly, didn't know any of the missing, wanted only to be left alone. Seattle wasn't ready to forget him. The media named him the Disappearer. His bland, unthreatening face filled every news channel. Psychologists debated his motives. Talk shows reconstructed his past. The families of the missing filled screens with grief. When the trial began, the courtroom felt weighted, a congregation of sorrow. The state's case was built from fragments, fingerprints, the dog hair, the repeating patterns of routine. There was no confession, no eyewitness, just an invisible line connecting too many missing souls. Adam sat motionless, eyes down. When he spoke, his voice was soft and distant, like he wasn't speaking to anyone in the room. His attorneys argued that the case was circumstantial, that the evidence was coincidence. But the city had already decided. After 6 days, the jury deadlocked. No murder conviction, only charges for obstruction, tampering, and interference. He was sentenced to 5 years, eligible for parole after 3. When the gavel fell, the rain outside seemed to hesitate, hanging in the air. And, as Adam Holbrook disappeared once again behind concrete walls, Seattle was left with its silence. A city haunted not by monsters in the dark, but by how ordinary they always seem. For the families of the missing, justice was just another ghost, seen for a moment in the mist, then gone. swallowed by the endless gray rain. As the strange coincidences began to stack up, Portland's detectives launched a special task force, pulling in specialists from across Oregon and even consulting federal profilers familiar with serial abductions along the West Coast. A disturbing pattern emerged from the fragments. Gavin's method was never direct. He relied on subtleties, not force. His approach was patient, calculated, and eerily polite. He used the environment as part of his disguise. An abandoned car on a shoulder, a lost animal wandering a parking lot, a simple offer to carry a box. Each gesture designed to disarm suspicion, to appear useful, to make himself invisible through ordinary kindness. Those who vanished were taken not in chaos, but in moments of quiet distraction, when they were weary, preoccupied, or lulled by routine. By the summer of 1989, Portland was holding its breath. A third disappearance shattered any illusion of coincidence. A 17-year-old named Laura P. never returned home from a friend's birthday gathering. Her path was well lit, her final messages cheerful, ending only when her phone died near midnight. Officers scoured the neighborhood. They interviewed bartenders, bus drivers, and party guests. Several witnesses remembered a man in a blue windbreaker carrying groceries, speaking softly as he moved down the street. He was courteous, unremarkable, just another face in the night. No one thought to stop him. A week later, Laura's backpack surfaced at a downtown bus depot. Every surface had been scrubbed clean. Only one mark remained, a faint smear later matched to a type of cooking oil found only in Gavin's grandmother's kitchen. The city's pulse quickened. Neighborhood watch groups multiplied. Parents kept porch lights burning late. Doors, once left open, now latched before dusk. Local papers christened the suspect with a name that stuck, the Misplacer. It was an odd label, but fitting. He didn't seem to remove people violently. He erased them, quietly misplacing lives as if tidying a world only he understood. Detective Eliza Moreno, newly promoted but already known for her relentlessness, took command of the investigation. Gavin became her private obsession. She mapped his childhood, chased whispers from former classmates, and dug through sealed medical files. The picture that formed was one of vanishing women. His own mother had disappeared from a community support group decades earlier, her absence wrapped in family myth rather than police record. It was as though Gavin had inherited a legacy of disappearance. Then came the break everyone had been waiting for. A survivor. Her name was Monica R., and she had escaped by sheer instinct. One autumn evening, she was walking home with grocery bags when a man approached, offering to help. She declined, but he persisted gently, smiling in that familiar, practiced way. As they neared her building, Monica caught him glancing toward a blue pickup idling nearby. Something about his stillness turned her blood cold. When he tried to guide her toward a side alley, she ran, dropping her bags, screaming for help. Gavin vanished between buildings before anyone arrived, but Monica remembered everything: the jacket, the tone of his voice, the soft sorrow beneath his words. Her testimony gave detectives the first real trail in months: the description of the truck and its partial license number. The vehicle led police to a quiet house on the city's outskirts belonging to Gavin's grandmother. She was frail and confused, but confirmed that her grandson often appeared without warning, sometimes borrowing her truck, sometimes returning it filthy, filled with scraps of paper and old clothes. Forensics teams combed through the vehicle. They found fibers identical to those from Monica's sweater and smudged prints on the door handle. When investigators searched Gavin's room, they uncovered notebooks filled with obsessively neat handwriting, lists of street names, bus timetables, and brief coded phrases. Market Thursday, 7 p.m., Tabor, blue cap, Laura, side stare. Each entry corresponded with a known disappearance. The final page was worse. It read, "It isn't them I'm chasing. It's the instant before they're gone." Gavin's arrest unfolded quietly just after dawn. Officers waited as he stepped from his grandmother's front door with 2 canvas bags. He surrendered without protest, his expression unreadable, his hands folded neatly on his knees as if awaiting instruction. Once in custody, Gavin spoke little. He neither confessed nor denied, answering questions with silence or vague politeness. Psychologists argued over his state of mind. Some labeled him a sociopath devoid of empathy. Others believed he was detached from reality, obsessed with control and disappearance as art. A few theorized he viewed himself as a custodian of absence, removing people who, in his distorted logic, didn't belong. The trial that followed gripped the entire Pacific Northwest. Families of the missing packed every bench. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their lenses fixed on Gavin's calm, unblinking face. Witnesses recounted the small courtesies that had preceded each abduction, his offers of help, his quiet demeanor, his forgettable smile. Monica took the stand, describing her encounter with steady bravery. She spoke of his insistence on carrying her bags, of the tremor in his voice that masked intent. Her testimony, paired with the physical evidence, Gavin's fingerprints on recovered items, the truck's connection to the abductions, the oil trace from Laura's pack, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. The defense countered with a portrait of loneliness. They painted Gavin as an awkward recluse, misunderstood and socially adrift, scapegoated by a city desperate for closure. They pointed to the absence of definitive proof. No DNA, no bodies, no eyewitness to the moment of capture. The jury listened for weeks, torn between fear and doubt. In the end, they convicted Gavin on multiple counts of kidnapping and unlawful restraint, but acquitted him of murder. The missing were still missing, their fates unresolved. Gavin received a 30-year sentence, eligible for review after 15. He offered no words at sentencing, no apology, no revelation, only that same blank gaze, the quiet triumph of withholding truth. Where the others had gone, Rebecca, Tim, Laura, remained the question that haunted the city long after the courtroom lights dimmed. Their families refused to fade into silence. Year after year, they gathered in vigils, holding candles by the river, speaking names aloud into the wet Pacific air. Out of their grief grew networks for the missing and reforms in how Oregon handled unsolved disappearances. Portland began to rebuild, not just its streets, but its vigilance. Under Detective Moreno's guidance, the department adopted new practices: trauma-sensitive interviews, faster alerts, and community partnerships. She often reminded younger officers, absence isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's something colder, something waiting Gavin's family unraveled quietly. His mother remained a ghost in public records, her existence confirmed only by a faded photograph found folded in his wallet. His grandmother died a few years later, her small home emptied of memories except for boxes of unsigned birthday cards. Gavin himself withdrew into prison life. He refused interviews and correspondence. Every few years, when another unexplained disappearance occurred somewhere in the Northwest, his name resurfaced in headlines. An echo rather than an answer. The myth of the misplacer persisted, a warning disguised as folklore. Beyond Oregon, investigators in Washington, Idaho, and Northern California reopened long-forgotten files, chasing parallels in dates, routes, and routines. Nothing definitive emerged, but the unease lingered, a sense that Gavin's shadow extended farther than anyone could prove. Portland healed in fragments. New residents arrived unaware, while longtime neighbors still tied blue ribbons around trees in memory of those lost. Sidewalks bore fading murals of vanished children. Every candle left at a vigil, every whispered story became part of the city's living memory. Teachers began weaving lessons on safety into classrooms. Radio hosts told listeners to trust their instincts. Each November, on the anniversary of Monica's escape, crowds gathered downtown for the Walk for the Missing. Hundreds carried lanterns, their light pooling over the pavement like reflected stars. Some wore pins marked with Gavin's name crossed out. A small rebellion against fear, a symbol that remembrance belongs to the lost, not the one who took them. Locals say that on certain misty mornings, when fog drapes Portland's bridges, faint faces ripple on the water's surface, some familiar, some never identified. And they say that somewhere, in the weave of alleyways and rain-slicked streets, the misplacer's story survives as both warning and vow to remain vigilant, to extend kindness without blindness, to never stop searching for the missing. Years later, the city's cold case archive continues to swell. Every file holds a family, a silence, a life waiting to be found. Gavin Harkins remains imprisoned, his secrets sealed inside him, unless time, accident, or confession ever forces them out. For most, the lesson endures in quieter ways. A locked door before bedtime, a quick glance over the shoulder before stepping off the curb, the small rituals of caution that tie memory to survival. Eugene, Oregon, lies 2 hours south, a patchwork of neighborhoods stitched together by green valleys and winding rivers. To outsiders, it feels gentler, almost immune to the darkness that once haunted Portland. But the forests at its borders hold a different kind of quiet. It was there, one spring afternoon, that 8-year-old Lucy Sanderson disappeared. Bright, curious, and endlessly brave, Lucy was the eldest of 3. Her mother, a painter, nurtured her love of exploration. Her father, a history teacher, taught her to read the land, the prints of deer in wet soil, the trill of birds echoing through the pines. And like the children before her, she walked into the woods one day, never to return. Lucy loved collecting strangely shaped stones along the river's edge, but above all, she cherished wandering alone into the wild stretch behind her family's modest ranch house. Her father called it Adventure Wood, a patch of field, maple trees, and ferns that seemed to hum with possibility. It was late April, a Sunday morning, the air fragrant with the promise of rain, the yard dotted with tiny violet blooms. Lucy's mother was absorbed in painting in her sunlit studio, her 2 younger brothers napping, and her father grading papers at the kitchen table. That morning, Lucy asked if she could take her new blue bucket outside to gather wildflowers for the dining table. Her mother, attentive to the soft buzzing of bees nearby, nodded, reminding her to stay inside the fence. Lucy agreed with the kind of innocent certainty children hold, unaware that she was about to cross into a day that would haunt her family forever. The backyard melted seamlessly into Adventure Wood, thick with maples, ferns, and undergrowth. Beyond the trees, the land plunged toward the Mackenzie River, marking the edge of her familiar world. Lucy wandered along the margin, picking blooms, humming snatches of fairy tales, and fragments of radio jingles. Later, a neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, would recall seeing the blue bucket bouncing among the grass as she tended her vegetable garden. By noon, Lucy's father called her in for lunch. No reply. Assuming she was absorbed in play, he ventured toward the tree line, calling her name, imagining she would leap from behind a tree or bush, but she did not appear. His voice, initially confident, began to falter. His wife soon joined, their calls rising from worry to panic. Within an hour, neighbors fanned out through the woods, searching with lanterns and flashlights. As darkness fell, police arrived, setting up a command center in the Sandersons' living room. The initial investigation was thorough. Officers, volunteers, and search dogs combed Adventure Wood and the river's edge with painstaking care. They discovered only Lucy's blue bucket, crushed violets spilling from its sides, abandoned beside a moss-covered log. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her father later testified in court, "I could still feel her presence everywhere, like she might come running out at any moment." But she was already gone. Over the next few days, helicopters hovered over the forest, search dogs padded silently among ferns, and divers explored the river in black wetsuits, scanning every bend. Radios crackled with urgency as townspeople brought supplies and hung flyers in every window. Grief counselors met with Lucy's classmates, who brought drawings, letters, and stuffed animals. Reporters tracked every whisper, magnifying each rumor into hope or despair. On the 3rd day, searchers spotted a small child's shoe, caked in mud, resting at a bend in the trail near the riverbank. Lucy's mother recognized it immediately, a tiny heart drawn on the insole, marked with a purple pen for luck. Not far away, snagged on a blackberry thicket, was a torn scrap of blue fabric. DNA testing confirmed both belonged to Lucy, but there was no blood, no evidence of struggle, and crucially, no footprints beyond those of the family and search volunteers. Nothing suggested anyone else had been there. Investigators expanded the case from accidental drowning to potential abduction. Rangers and deputies flagged every vehicle leaving the area, checked records of recently released offenders, and pursued reports of strangers spotted near the river trails that week. Each lead dissolved into nothing. A fisherman who had noticed nothing unusual, a camper with out-of-state plates, a delivery driver whose route passed the area. Clues were tantalizing, yet inconclusive, slipping away under scrutiny. Lucy's parents, desperate for answers, hired private detectives. They rented billboards, appeared on local news programs, and gradually attracted national attention. Their story resonated: a safe town, cautious parents, a child gone as though plucked from the air. Theories swirled online: child trafficking rings, a hermit living in the woods, even whispers of supernatural forces. Each possibility, investigated carefully, failed to align with all the known facts, leaving the family exhausted and hollow. In the months following, minor leads trickled in. A hiker discovered a child's mitten in a rest stop bathroom 20 miles upriver. Its style matched Lucy's, but ultimately tests confirmed it was not hers. 4 months later, another child wandered off in a nearby town, but was found unharmed, having followed a stray dog. Authorities confirmed no connection to Lucy. Detective Harold Shaw took command. An adoptive son of Oregon, Shaw had built his career on meticulous observation and patient determination. He refused to accept simplistic explanations. Each week, he returned to Adventurewood, mapping every burrow, hollow, and potential hiding place. He even commissioned drone footage to survey areas inaccessible on foot. "The woods here can hide anything," he told Lucy's mother, "but one day, we find what we're looking for." Seasons turned, one after another. Each spring, the Sandersons left fresh flowers on the log where Lucy's bucket had been found. Her brothers grew taller, older, passing from grade school to high school, with a single seat left empty at the dinner table, a symbol of the sister who never returned. Lucy's mother's paintings darkened with grief, streaked in blues and grays, often overlooking the empty woods outside their windows. A year later, a newly recruited volunteer for the local search and rescue team, Isla Filipino, brought a theory to Detective Shaw. If Lucy had strayed off the trail to pick more flowers, she might have fallen into one of the deep animal dens scattered along the forest's edge, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Shaw organized a targeted search using ground-penetrating radar. Several hollow spaces beneath tree roots were mapped, but nothing identifiable as Lucy's was found. Public attention to the case waxed and waned. Still, the Sandersons maintained public vigils and search committees even as interest elsewhere faded. On Lucy's 10th birthday, the community gathered in the schoolyard to release lanterns, each light floating upward in her memory. The absence was felt most keenly by her brothers, who wrestled with survivor's guilt and the social awkwardness of enduring tragedy. The town, once familiar and friendly, now treated the family with a quiet reverence, whispers carrying warnings from one neighbor to the next. 3 years into the investigation, another ambiguous clue emerged. A fisherman discovered a battered backpack wedged under a fallen tree along the Mackenzie River. Its style matched one Lucy's grandmother said she had gifted her 2 months before her disappearance. Yet certainty was impossible. No initials, no unique markings, and the manufacturer's widespread distribution left room for doubt. Inside were a plastic comb, several smooth river stones, and a small crumpled drawing in blue marker, suggestive of Lucy, but never definitively hers. Years of spring floods and heavy rains had washed away traces along the riverbank. Footprints disappeared, debris scattered, and hope for a conclusive resolution diminished. Lucy's parents clung to rituals, walks in Adventurewood, publishing letters to her in the local paper, and advocating for legislation supporting missing persons. Detective Shaw retired 5 years after the disappearance, his search unresolved, but his meticulous records passed to every new investigator assigned to the case. His files became a gesture of faith in the long arc of hope, a reminder that persistence might one day yield answers. Speculation divided the town. Some whispered Lucy had been taken far from Eugene, perhaps hidden in a commune or raised in secret by a distant relative. Others argued she had perished in the forest, swept away by the Mackenzie's currents, or claimed by predatory wildlife so common in Oregon's wilds. A smaller, more superstitious group invoked the legend of the forest taker, a bogeyman figure from Kalapuya folklore predating European settlement. No matter the theory, her absence left an indelible mark on Eugene. The woods, once a place of childhood freedom, became charged with both memory and fear. Parents warned their children with hushed urgency. Siblings left a seat for Lucy at every family gathering, a tangible presence amid absence. Her story became woven into the landscape, a reminder that even the smallest misstep in the wild could echo across years. For the Sandersons, every season became a meditation on hope, grief, and endurance. Flowers were still left at the log, lanterns still floated in schoolyards, and the townspeople, quietly vigilant, remembered a child who had vanished not with a scream, but into the calm hush of Oregon's untamed heart. Each year, as winter crept closer, townsfolk at the general store would speak in hushed tones about fleeting shapes in the treetops, or a faint melody carried on the wind that sounded eerily like Lucy. Over time, her name joined the mournful roster of missing children across the Pacific Northwest. Her wide-eyed, open-faced photograph appeared alongside posters of teenagers from Portland, hikers from Crater Lake, and children from Seattle. The Sandersons traveled often, attending conferences to console families new to the nightmare no parent ever wishes to know, always hoping fresh investigators might spark new leads. A decade after Lucy disappeared, Adventure Wood was purchased by a conservation trust, dedicated as a children's nature preserve. The Sanderson family was invited to help transform the space, building winding paths, planting wildflowers, and installing a memorial bench topped with a bronze casting of Lucy's cherished blue bucket. Her mother's paintings were displayed in a garden classroom. Her father would share stories with visiting students, recounting a little girl's love of the woods and the lessons of caution and community. Even then, new leads trickled in. An anonymous package contained a weathered photograph of 2 children, one resembling Lucy. The image was traced to a Kansas photo studio, but dated prior to Lucy's birth, another dead end. Calls came from across the Northwest claiming sightings of Lucy or a woman using her name, each carefully debunked. Hope remained fragile, sustained only by the family's unbroken vigilance. Lucy's legacy extended beyond sorrow, shaping how her family and the community adapted to her absence. Her brothers became involved with search and rescue efforts, determined to resolve other cold cases, if not their own. Her father published a memoir detailing missing children and the enduring, reshaping weight of grief. Her mother found purpose advocating for disappeared children, painting not only Lucy's memory, but the faces and stories of many across Oregon and the broader Northwest. Each story shared at vigils or awareness walks wove Lucy's tale into the lives of countless others, victims of accidents, crime, or the unpredictability of nature. Every spring, purple wildflowers sprouted across Adventure Wood, and neighbors gathered to leave bouquets at the memorial bench. The Sandersons, tempered and gentler from years of grief, greeted every family who visited, instructing children to always let someone know where they were. As dusk settled, eyes often lifted to the treetops, searching for Lucy's favorite bird, the indigo bunting. Lucy's case remains unresolved, a haunting enigma in Oregon. Detectives, junior officers inheriting the file each year, forensic scientists combing for overlooked evidence, keep her case close, revisiting details with the hope that new technology, time, or a sudden stroke of fortune might finally provide answers. For now, the certainty is the ache of the unknown, and the resilience of a family and community refusing to let her memory fade. Along the winding bends of the Mackenzie River, on quiet Sundays when the wind bends the wildflowers, locals sometimes glimpse a flash of blue amid the green. Perhaps it's a forgotten bucket, perhaps a sliver of sky. Residents insist, though, that in those pauses between sound and shadow, Lucy is still wandering the woods she loved, and every retelling brings her home a little more. Tacoma, Washington, exists as a city of contrasts, where industrial machinery and natural beauty collide beneath the looming shadow of Mount Rainier. Freight trains thunder beneath steel bridges while the port hums with commerce. Yet amidst the noise lies a hidden stillness. Alleyways where secrets linger, neighborhoods stitched together by old rumors and restless spirits. For nearly 30 years, one family has endured at the center of such a shadow: the disappearance and suspected murder of Connor Riley. Connor was the youngest of three brothers, raised amid the towering cranes, empty lots, and winding back roads of Tacoma's warehouse district. Bright, imaginative, and prone to speaking to himself when he thought no one was listening, he was described by his mother, Marion, as an old soul trapped in a child's body. He sketched maps of imaginary kingdoms and dreamed of becoming an architect. School was often challenging. He was sensitive, sometimes teased or bullied, but he possessed a quiet resilience, always picking himself up, retrieving his drawings, and returning to the world with gentle curiosity. On a late October Friday in 1996, Connor vanished. 12 years old, he had just finished classes for the week. He was expected to walk 3 blocks home, as he had countless times before. That afternoon, his brothers went ahead to catch a rerun of their favorite cartoon. Connor said he would stop by the corner store for gum and soda. He never arrived. His mother began calling friends, walking the familiar route twice, the light fading into desperation. Police were summoned. A search began that would dominate the family, and eventually the city, for decades of anguish and unanswered questions. Local detectives retraced Connor's steps. At the store, witnesses recalled him purchasing bubble gum and a root beer, but none saw him depart. A clerk, uncertain in memory, recalled a blue truck idling by the curb. No driver was described. Others mentioned a man in a red scarf walking the alley. Leads looped endlessly, confusing and frustrating investigators. Teams scoured the blocks, wooded lots, and alleys. Volunteers plastered flyers on every telephone pole and storefront. Media coverage was relentless, Connor's face appearing in print and on television until the city itself felt haunted by his absence. He was gone. No trace, no clues. The weekend saw port schedules and traffic patterns scrutinized, searching for any sign he might have been caught in industrial hazards. Nothing emerged. The family became consumed by the search. Marion, her face gaunt with worry, appeared on television interviews, pleading for information. Connor's father, Walter, retraced the boy's route each evening, replaying the afternoon, scanning for overlooked details. The city offered its support: meal trains, anonymous donations, neighbors assisting wherever possible. Yet the mystery twisted the family into knots. Connor's brothers struggled in school, carrying the weight of survivor guilt. Relationships frayed under constant strain. Months passed. Police gradually shifted attention to other pressing matters. Marion and Walter hired a private investigator, Arthur Combe, known for his tenacity and obsessive attention to forensic detail. He had solved prior missing persons cases by tracing subtle patterns. But even Coe hit a wall. "Tacoma swallows memories," he said. "The port is a labyrinth. Too many places a boy can disappear." 2 years later, a potential break came. In 1998, a construction crew working in an industrial zone north of downtown uncovered the shallow remains of a young boy beneath broken concrete slabs. The city held its collective breath. The remains were identified as another child missing from the Seattle suburbs, a case previously closed. Brief hope faded into despair, renewing the Riley family's resolve. Marion began writing to the governor, advocating for a statewide cold case task force. Connor's disappearance gnawed at Tacoma's shared consciousness. Each autumn, a vigil was held at the corner store where he was last seen, candles flickering along the sidewalk. His brothers grew to adulthood but remained close to the city, drawn to the spaces their sibling had loved. Walter passed away in 2005, leaving behind a legacy of quiet devotion and unresolved sorrow. The mystery of Connor Riley, like that of Lucy Sanderson, became woven into the regional landscape, a reminder that even amid bustling cities, factories, and rivers, children can vanish and leave entire communities suspended between hope, memory, and grief. Marion's heart had been battered by years of hope that never took root. By the time she became a grandmother, she kept a dog-eared journal, writing letters to her missing son each year. The case never disappeared entirely. It simply grew quieter. Detectives cycled in and out over the decades. Some believed Connor had been abducted by a passing truck driver at the port. Others speculated he might have run away, though Marion always insisted he would never have left without telling her. Rumors proliferated. Some whispered of a child predator ring, others of a shadowy stranger lurking near the tracks, or even a boat crew with secrets to hide. City Hall promised new forensic tools, DNA mapping, and social analysis systems, yet each promise dimmed with time. In 2013, a cold case unit under Detective Angela Miller reopened Connor's file. Haunted by the disappearance of a friend years prior, Miller brought fresh eyes to the evidence. She reviewed witness statements closely, uncovering inconsistencies in the timing of Connor's last movements. The store clerk was re-interviewed and admitted confusion about the timeline. Another witness, working the night shift at a nearby tire shop, recalled seeing Connor speaking with a man in a blue Tacoma sweatshirt just before sunset. Miller also examined grainy traffic camera footage, spotting a small figure resembling Connor heading toward the port entrance, then vanishing behind stacked shipping containers. The red scarf mentioned in initial reports became a new focus. Miller traced purchases, checked citywide surveillance, and canvassed homeless shelters. Old notes revealed a man in a red scarf had been questioned in connection with another disappearance in 1988, but was released for lack of evidence. He had never been linked to Connor, a frustrating dead end. Turning to forensic work, Miller pushed for retesting of old evidence. A partial fingerprint lifted from a vending machine near the convenience store was inconclusive, but suggested adult male characteristics. DNA collected from port workers, known offenders, and missing person databases yielded no match. She then published an age-progressed image of Connor, hoping he might still be alive, living under a new identity somewhere. Marion, alongside Connor's brothers, organized annual search events, rallying volunteers across Tacoma to walk his routes, post flyers, and report tips. Their advocacy led to citywide efforts to overhaul missing person reporting. Marion became a fixture at council meetings, memorials, and statewide cold case reviews, her voice a tireless call for vigilance. As the 20th anniversary of Connor's disappearance approached in 2016, Marion received an anonymous letter. Inside was a single photograph. A young boy, hair curling like Connor's, standing by a blue truck near a dock. The image was faded, the background indistinct, yet Marion clung to it. A local news station aired a segment, asking anyone recognizing the truck to contact authorities. Several families called in, thinking the vehicle belonged to a neighbor or relative, but nothing led to new discoveries. Detective Miller traced the truck to a 1980s Chevy model common in Tacoma at the time. She compared the shape to old parking tickets, delivery manifests, and insurance records. No clear leads emerged, but her review uncovered a forgotten witness statement. A dock worker recalled seeing a boy matching Connor's description sitting on a curb, legs swinging, seemingly waiting for someone. Inspired, Miller worked with a retired port manager to reconstruct traffic flows on the day Connor vanished. Reviewing archived port logs and driver tags, she compiled a list of all vehicles passing through between the afternoon hours. She mapped the area, marking choke points, entry gates, hidden alleys, blind spots, and camera placements. Interviews were conducted with longshoremen who had left Tacoma decades earlier. Several remembered a mud-covered delivery van idling briefly near the port entrance. The driver, described as nervous, wore sunglasses and a baseball cap over long hair. One witness added, "A kid with curly hair asked for the time. That's all I remember," then walked away. The reopened case reignited hope for the Riley family. Marion coordinated fundraisers, while Connor's brothers developed a website collecting tips, documenting sightings, and sharing city maps. The site attracted hundreds of visitors, mostly families searching for their own missing children, but some offered details about Connor's route. One woman claimed to have seen a boy matching Connor's description near a construction site the day he disappeared. Miller visited the site, cross-referencing old maps, but found no new evidence. She left flowers at the curb in remembrance. Years passed. Miller retired, passing the file to younger detectives. Marion relocated to a smaller apartment, walls covered with Connor's drawings and photographs. On the 30th anniversary of his disappearance, Tacoma's mayor unveiled a plaque at a waterfront park honoring Connor's name. His story became part of the city archives and a persistent open wound. Connor's story serves as a cautionary tale for Tacoma families, a symbol for those awaiting news of missing loved ones. Each October, citizens gather at the port, candles lit, letters read aloud, offering solace. Local leaders invoke his name in speeches about vigilance and community safety. On rainy nights, children whisper his name on their way home, keeping memory alive. Connor Riley's fate remains unresolved. Police periodically revisit the case with new forensic tools, reanalyzing old evidence, and following any fresh leads. Perhaps a forgotten item, an anonymous confession, or a new witness will one day provide answers. Until then, the case is a reminder that every disappearance shapes a community's collective memory, shaping caution, hope, and love. Marion now heads Tacoma's Missing Persons Awareness Board, traveling the region to speak about persistence, grief, and the quiet rituals of remembrance. She keeps Connor's backpack on a shelf, his final note nestled between two faded drawings. "Be home soon." Those few words, written the day he vanished, carry decades of pain and hope alike. Tacoma has grown since 1996, broader and busier, yet Connor Riley's story persists. Parents teach children the lessons learned from his disappearance: vigilance, care, and community responsibility. Cranes swing over parks dedicated to missing children. Schools emphasize awareness and compassion. Each spring, cherry blossoms bloom along Connor's final route, pink petals drifting across sidewalks, a quiet promise of renewal and the faint possibility of return. Walk the port at dusk when the hum of machinery softens and one can sense the story still waiting, Connor among them. A lost boy, a grieving family, and a city refusing to forget. The Puget Sound mirrors the duality of the region itself. By day, its waters sparkle beneath Seattle's skyline, white foam streaking blue waves. At night, thick fog rolls in from the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the Sound feels alive, harboring secrets and forgotten stories. For those familiar with the tides and currents, listening closely, the waters speak of loss. Sailors, swimmers, and lovers, claimed by its depths over centuries. Among these mysteries lies the story of Isla Chen. Isla was 26 when she disappeared. She lived alone in a small apartment in Breton, Washington, across the Sound from Seattle, working as a freelance photographer and a part-time barista at a waterfront cafe. Quiet, observant, and perpetually with a camera in hand, she sought moments others overlooked. Her parents resided in Tacoma, her brother Marcus in the city. She had friends but kept them at a slight distance, as if part of her gaze always reached beyond the present into landscapes only she could see. In March 2014, Isla told Marcus she had been hired to photograph a private coastal retreat north of Breton. It was a high-paying project for a wealthy couple who wanted artistic shots for a luxury magazine. Isla packed her gear and left on a Thursday evening, promising to return by Sunday. She never came back. When Marcus could not reach her by Monday evening, he drove to Breton. Her apartment was locked, her car in its usual place, speckled with Pacific Northwest rain. He called the police. Hospitals and jails yielded nothing. By Tuesday, a missing person report was filed. By Wednesday, local news had picked up the story. Young photographer vanishes in Breton. The Breton Police Department began checking the retreat Isla had mentioned but found nothing. No private property matched her description, no couple had requested a photographer. Either Isla had been misled or someone had deliberately provided false details. This realization chilled the investigators to the bone. Isla was either fleeing something or walking straight into danger. Authorities traced her phone's last signal, which had pinged near the Breton waterfront, close to the abandoned timber yards now shadowed by silent industrial buildings. The signal cut off at roughly 5:15 p.m., about an hour after she had left her apartment. Traffic cameras in the area recorded her silver Honda Civic turning onto Dock Street at 5:10 p.m., but no footage captured her ultimate destination or what transpired thereafter. A search of the waterfront began immediately. Police divers combed shallow areas near the piers. Volunteers scoured the shoreline, collecting driftwood, debris, and any traces of evidence. The sound, as always, kept its secrets. The water returned nothing, yet investigators began forming a theory. Isla had been lured to the waterfront under false pretenses, encountered someone, and simply vanished. Interviews with her friends and colleagues revealed troubling hints. Two individuals independently reported that Isla had been excited about joining a local photography collective, a group that supposedly met near the Sound and worked on experimental projects. However, when detectives attempted to track the group via social media or public records, they found nothing tangible. It was as if the collective existed only in whispers, visible only to those who already knew where to look. One woman, interviewed about the group, recalled meeting a man at a coffee shop who had recruited her. He appeared to be in his 40s, hair salt and pepper, dressed professionally, and spoke with a calm confidence about the project. The man had claimed the group met at private locations near the Puget Sound in particular, describing the water as the best teacher of composition. The woman later admitted she had found his words poetic, but unnervingly precise, and she declined the invitation, warning friends to steer clear. The description of this figure circulated widely among investigators. FBI consultants specializing in art fraud and missing person cases were brought in. A disturbing possibility emerged: a predatory network operating under the guise of artistic collaboration, targeting vulnerable women through subtle manipulation and professional pretense. The theory suggested that Isla may have been deliberately isolated by someone using sophistication rather than force. Investigators then reviewed missing person reports across Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia from the preceding decade. Patterns emerged. In 2008, photographer Tessa Hodkins disappeared from a waterfront in Olympia. In 2011, painter Renee Marin vanished near Campbell River, British Columbia, after saying she was meeting a gallery owner. In 2009, sculptor Priya Nair went missing in Tacoma after planning to attend a private exhibition. All were young, artistic women. All vanished after following invitations that promised professional opportunities. Recognizing the pattern, authorities assembled a multi-jurisdictional task force, informally called the Puget Sound Arts Network Disappearance Initiative, though no definitive connection was yet established. Yet the similarities, careful targeting, sophisticated grooming, cross-border coordination, pointed to something far more calculated than random acts of violence. Investigators cross-referenced the women's online presence, social media, and shared contacts. Nothing overtly connected the cases, but subtle parallels emerged. Each woman had attended workshops, gallery openings, or photography classes in their cities. All were active in creative online communities. The man described in the coffee shop appeared at least twice, once at a Seattle gallery, once at an outdoor photography workshop in Tacoma. In both instances, he observed quietly, recorded meticulously, and vanished before anyone could confront him. Despite the investigative pressure, no conclusive suspect surfaced. The man with salt and pepper hair remained a phantom, documented but never apprehended. Isla's apartment yielded no foreign DNA, and her computer had been wiped. Her camera equipment vanished along with her. Years slipped by. The case became one of the region's cold files, revisited annually, but always unresolved. Families of the missing women formed networks to raise awareness, exchanging information and advocating for systemic improvements in cross-jurisdictional investigations. Priya Nair's mother wrote a book documenting the disappearances. Tessa Hodkin's father lobbied for improved interagency communication. Isla's brother, Marcus Chen, produced a documentary examining the predatory network theory and highlighting the systemic obstacles to solving such crimes that spanned multiple regions. In 2019, a possible lead surfaced. A woman in Portland reported being approached by a man matching the description of the recruiter and narrowly avoiding a dangerous situation. She had recorded part of their interaction on her phone. The audio, though faint, revealed a cultured, measured voice, occasionally tinged with a subtle accent. He spoke about authentic artistic vision and exclusive collectors who valued uncompromising work. The undertone was chilling. These collectors allegedly paid for access to both art and experiences denied to the public. Voice analysts compared the recording to thousands of regional samples. No match was ever found. The investigation, invigorated briefly by this clue, once again hit a dead end. Whoever the recruiter was, he had disappeared. If a network existed, it had either dissolved or relocated, beyond the reach of investigators. Isla Chen's story became woven into Pacific Northwest dark lore, discussed on podcasts, featured in seminars on unsolved crimes, and cited whenever similar disappearances arose. Her final photograph, taken by her brother, circulated widely. In the image, she smiles faintly, camera in hand, the sound behind her, a hint of the girl poised at the edge of the world, a part of her already swallowed by the mystery. The Puget Sound Arts Network cases remain officially unsolved. Authorities emphasize that all links are circumstantial and that more evidence is needed to confirm the existence of a network. Yet families and advocates argue that the pattern itself constitutes proof. The repeated disappearance of artistic women from waterfront locales is too precise to be coincidental. Every year, on the anniversary of Isla's disappearance, Marcus organizes a community gathering at the Breton waterfront. Artists from across the region come together, sharing her photographs, discussing her work and legacy. Flowers are placed in the water. Driftwood is inscribed with messages, names spoken into the fog. In these rituals, Isla is more than a victim. She becomes a symbol, a reminder that some mysteries endure, and that those we love are remembered even without answers. The Puget Sound itself continues to guard its secrets. The dark waters ebb and flow, concealing evidence, swallowing whispers, and holding the silence of the lost. Somewhere beneath its surface, the truth about Isla Chen, and possibly others like her, remains. Yet the water, impartial and eternal, has not chosen to reveal it. Those who knew Isla continue their search, seeking not only answers, but meaning. Marcus Chen has become a prominent advocate for missing persons within creative communities, arguing that artists are uniquely vulnerable to exploitation. Their sensitivity, openness, and trust in others' vision make them targets for manipulation. The Isla Chen case stands as a stark lesson. Predators do not always rely on brute force. They employ strategy, patience, and the subtle allure of professional opportunity. They exploit trust, passion, and the very traits that make creative people exceptional. Ultimately, Isla's disappearance is a chilling reminder. The most dangerous predators operate in shadows, cloaked in sophistication, promising mentorship, inspiration, or collaboration. They rely on the willingness of sensitive, perceptive individuals to believe in connection, in opportunity, in the unseen. Her story endures not just as tragedy, but as caution. vigilance and awareness are essential, even when danger wears the guise of art and beauty. The case lingers like a shadow over the Puget Sound waterfront. It is a story whispered among dock workers and law enforcement alike, a cautionary tale about the fragile line separating a legitimate artistic community from something far darker between shared creativity and shared danger. Each evening, as fog rolls in from the Sound and blankets Breton's docks, Isla Chen's name is spoken quietly, sometimes as a prayer, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a hope that one day the water will return what it has taken and the families of the missing will finally learn the truth about their loved ones. The Pacific Northwest, from its misty coastal cliffs to the dense interior forests, is a land of constant secrets. Rain falls from above, yet it seems to rise from the earth itself, as though the region exhales its mysteries back to those who dwell within it. It is in this shadowed, untamed terrain where Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and British Columbia blur into vast wilderness that the story of Henry begins. But Henry's story is not about a single disappearance. It is a constellation of vanishing people, a recurring pattern that spans decades, a phantom presence haunting the collective consciousness of the region. To most, Henry was never a real person. He existed as a cipher, a silhouette, a name murmured quietly in the corridors of law enforcement but never confirmed in court. To families of the missing, he became the imagined architect of their heartbreak. To investigators across 3 states and 1 Canadian province, Henry was a ghost they could never fully capture, a predator moving through gaps in communication and exploiting the sluggish machinery of bureaucracy. The first documented connection emerged in 2003 when FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Margaret Chen was reviewing long unsolved cold cases in the Pacific Northwest. Chen noticed an unusual pattern, a series of disappearances stretching from 1987 to 2001, involving young women and occasionally young men, each occurring within roughly 50 miles of a major highway corridor winding through remote stretches of Washington and Oregon. These disappearances did not always form obvious geographic clusters, sometimes spanning hundreds of miles, but certain consistencies emerged. Victim selection, intervals between incidents, the precise execution of the abductions, and the complete absence of recovered remains suggested the work of a mobile, calculating predator. Chen began compiling a list of cases: Sarah Hutchkins, who vanished from a highway rest stop in 1987, Michael Torres, missing since 1989 after leaving a diner, Rebecca Morrison, last seen hitchhiking in 1991, James Kwan, gone from a highway motel in 1993, Diane Parsons, disappeared from a gas station in 1996. As Chen delved further, the list grew. Dozens more victims, identities obscured by the slow decay of archival records. The victims varied in age, gender, and ethnicity, initially suggesting multiple perpetrators. Yet the methodology remained hauntingly consistent. Each had disappeared from a public place. Each was expected at a specific destination. Each vanished without struggle, and each left no clear trace of foul play. From these similarities, Chen proposed an audacious theory: the work of a transient individual, perhaps a long-haul trucker or itinerant worker, who knew the terrain intimately and understood the limitations of regional law enforcement well enough to evade capture. The moniker, Henry, emerged from a marginal note in a notebook belonging to one investigator, a casual reference to a man named Henry in a 1990 missing person interview. No other documentation connected the name to the cases, yet it became a placeholder, a symbol for the unknown entity that seemed to tie the pattern together. Chen presented her findings to a multi-agency task force. Responses were mixed. Some investigators dismissed the connections as coincidence. Others recognized the potential profile of a serial predator operating across state lines. What remained certain was that no arrests had been made, no definitive evidence had surfaced, and the Henry hypothesis remained entrenched in speculation. In 2007, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Robert Ashford, a man arrested in Spokane, Washington, on unrelated grand larceny charges, casually mentioned during processing that he had known people who had disappeared. Intrigued, the detective pressed for more information. Ashford, perhaps seeking attention or bargaining for leniency, began describing incidents involving a man named Henry, or Hank, who orchestrated these activities. Ashford was vague on specifics, but characterized Henry as a charismatic man in his 50s, possibly former military, with extensive knowledge of remote areas. Investigators familiar with Chen's theory immediately took notice. Ashford was questioned extensively, but recanted most of his statements within days, claiming he had fabricated the story. He was convicted on his original charges and served his sentence. Nonetheless, his account reopened the Henry case. Law enforcement traced Ashford's movements and contacts, searching for threads that might lead to the elusive predator. What they found was incomplete and frustrating. Ashford had traveled widely, stayed at various motels and shelters, and was in the region during several of the documented disappearances. Yet no direct evidence linked him to any crime. Investigators also debated whether Ashford's Henry was the same individual they had been pursuing, or merely a regional legend he had co-opted for attention. Over the ensuing years, the Henry case evolved from a single investigation into a broader emblem of Pacific Northwest darkness. It became a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of remote communities, where vast distances and natural barriers allow a predator to move with near impunity. The Henry case inspired systemic change, improved interagency communication, centralized missing person databases, and a heightened focus on patterns rather than isolated incidents. Several suspects emerged over time. Long-haul trucker David Milner, whose routes covered much of the region during the years of disappearance, was scrutinized extensively, yet no evidence linked him conclusively to any case. Gerald Cross, arrested for an unrelated assault, was interrogated regarding the Henry pattern, but, like Milner, could not be tied to any missing person. Cross died in prison in 2015, never confessing, never charged for the disappearances. By the 2000s, Henry had become part of folklore, discussed on true crime podcasts, examined in documentaries about unsolved Pacific Northwest cases, and endlessly debated by amateur investigators online. Some posited that Henry was not one man, but a coordinated network of predators. Others contended that Henry had never existed, that the apparent pattern was coincidence, and that the name was a convenient fiction to organize desperate families' search for answers. Some believed Henry was dead, and that any crimes committed under that name had died with him, leaving only absence and speculation. From 1987 to 2001, at least 17 people vanished in locations matching the Henry pattern, with 12 cases meeting criteria for potential connection. Of these 12, no remains were recovered, no definitive crime scenes were identified, and no successful prosecutions were ever achieved. The cases existed in a state of ongoing incompleteness. Files open yet dormant, names repeated but unresolved. Families of the missing banded together, forming support networks. They organized searches, maintained memorial websites, and attended conferences in hopes of generating new leads. Their grief, channeled into advocacy, spurred legislative change. Washington strengthened missing persons laws, established cold case units, and implemented protocols to track potential serial predators across jurisdictions. Though born from tragedy, the Henry cases prompted tangible reforms in law enforcement's approach to regional crimes. As the decades passed, the chances of solving the Henry cases diminished. If Henry was a single perpetrator, he would now be elderly, likely in his 80s or 90s, possibly deceased. If Henry was a network, members may have moved, died, or otherwise become inaccessible. If the cases were unrelated, the patterns remained an artifact of coincidence and confirmation bias. Yet, the legend endured. Every new disappearance in the Pacific Northwest was measured against the established Henry pattern. Occasionally, tips emerged, a deathbed confession, an old associate recalling an incident, or new forensic evidence examined in light of modern techniques. Each lead was investigated rigorously, and each returned to the same uncertain place: ambiguity. In 2013, a nationally broadcast documentary series titled The Henry Mystery renewed attention on the cases. Families participated, their voices trembling as they recounted the names and faces of their missing loved ones and the decades-long anguish of unanswered questions. Forensic experts speculated that advances in DNA technology might one day solve the mysteries if remains were discovered. The series generated hundreds of new tips, though none proved conclusive. Today, the Henry cases remain among the Pacific Northwest's most haunting mysteries. The names of the victims, Sarah, Michael, Rebecca, James, Diane, and others, are remembered. Their families continue the vigil, maintaining online memorials, attending conferences, and hoping that one day a confession or discovery will finally provide closure. Who was Henry? What happened to those who vanished? The questions remain unanswered, yet they have reshaped the region's understanding of safety, vigilance, and interagency coordination. The Henry story is not one of a single solved crime, but a narrative of systemic vulnerability and human perseverance. It chronicles a region confronting its own darkness, its procedural gaps, and the fragility of those moving through its vast, isolated landscapes. It is a story that may never be fully resolved, yet it has fundamentally transformed the Pacific Northwest. Communities are more connected, agencies communicate more effectively, and awareness of potential serial predators has deepened. The rain continues to fall over the mountains, forests, and highways where Henry may have roamed. Disappearances still occur, yet now the absences are recorded, documented, and remembered. The possibility remains that one day Henry, or Henry's network, will be revealed, or at least that the fates of the victims will be clarified. Until that day, Henry exists as a phantom, a shadow haunting the consciousness of the Pacific Northwest, a reminder that some questions demand answers that may take a lifetime, or longer, to surface. And yet, in that patient waiting, there is a form of resolution, a commitment to memory, to justice postponed but not abandoned, and to the enduring belief that even amid profound mystery, truth and compassion persist.